will start in 1 minute. Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome in the discussions of revitalizing an endangered language in Australia. What genre theory and pedagogy have to offer. Selamat datang semuanya, selamat datang di diskusi tentang revitalisasi bahasa yang terancam punah di Australia. Apa yang dapat ditawarkan dari genre teori dan pedagogi. Hari ini yang akan menjadi pembicara adalah Anna Crane dari University of Sydney. Tapi sebelum itu, kami ingin mempersilahkan Ibu Sonya selaku Kepala Departemen untuk membuka acara. So before we start, we would like to ask Frau Sonya as the head of the linguistic department to give some words before we start. Thank you.
Okay, thank you,
Silakan Ibu Sonya.
Ya, terima kasih Mas Nazar. Okay, good. So good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this webinar today with Miss Anna Crane. Hello, Anna.
Hello.
And the title of this webinar is Revitalizing an Endangered Language in Australia. So this topic is very relevant for us and also very interesting, because there are, of course, some similarities between Indonesia and Australia. Although it is not, like an apple-to-apple comparison, but I think we can learn so much from Anna, who's been doing this research maybe for so many years. So we can hear from her and learn from her. We can learn firsthand how it is to, revitalize and, what we can do to make sure that the language are still present with us. We have here in the discussion also some students from the major, well, actually not major, but they are focusing on language and culture. So I expect from the students that you also, contribute to this discussion. You can ask a question to, to Anna, and I hope we can, learn and have a very fruitful and pleasant discussion this morning. I would like to thank my colleague Harni, for making this event possible, and also for Nazar, who is willing to take the role as a moderator today. We also have here the new head of linguistics program, Ms. Triaswarit, or we call Mbak Ririt. Mbak Ririt is the new head of linguistics program. So once again, I wish you a pleasant discussion today. Thank you, Anna, for taking the time to talk to us today. I hope we can, expand and strengthen our collaboration in the future. Okay, so without further ado, yes, I wish you all a pleasant discussion. Okay, thank you, Nazar.
Thank you, Frau Sonya.
Yes.
So we can give a virtual applause to Frau Sonya. Thank you. Yeah, in this online situation, everything is almost virtual. Yeah, and before we start, I would like to ask you to open your video, to open your camera to take one picture first, and then after that, we can start the discussions. And Miss Regina, would you like to help?
Yes. Okay.
Thank you. Silakan dibuka dulu kameranya.
I'm gonna take 2 or 3 pictures.
Ya.
Oke, tolong dibuka kameranya. Saya hitung ya. 1, 2, 3. Sebentar. Saya mau ambil satu foto lagi. Okay, please smile, everyone. 1, 2, 3. Smile. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Regina.
You're welcome.
Okay, I want to introduce Anna first. Anna is a linguist and current PhD candidate at the University of Sydney. And now she's studying the nexus between linguistic description and the priorities of Aboriginal people working to working to maintain and teach their endangered languages. So, and she also have like more than 10 years of experience working with indigenous language documentation, description, and revitalization. And she has employed systemic functional linguistic theory to contribute to studies of workplace and high school literacy practices with the Australian Catholic University and the LCT Center for Knowledge Building at the University of Sydney. So actually, she already have a lot of experience doing or working on revitalization of endangered language. So without further ado, then I would like Anna to start the discussion. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you, Nazar. Hello, everybody. I'll just change my view so I can see my slides. Can everybody see my slides okay? Oh, not yet.
Yeah.
How's that?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, great. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you to Sonia and Nazar for the introduction, and Harni for inviting me. As has been said, I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Sydney, and my supervisors are James Martin and David Rose. So here's my outline for today. I'll first just briefly sort of talk about languages and linguistics in Australia, just to give you a little bit of context about the field that I'm working in and some of the specific aspects of how that works here. And then I'm going to talk about a particular genre called mantha in the language that I'm working with, and the purpose of these kinds of texts, before moving on to detail a little bit of the work that I did to analyze these texts and also work with making new texts in education, and that's where I sort of talk a little bit about pedagogy. And then I'll briefly talk about some of the challenges and questions that came out of that specific work that I did, before concluding. Sorry, I'm having trouble navigating. Okay, so just to begin, I just want to acknowledge the Aboriginal country that I speak from today. So I speak from Guringai country. People in this place is Katang, and Guringai people are waking up their language. I recognise that their relationship with this place is deep and old and has sustained country and people through deep time. I also recognise that we have, as non-Aboriginal people, and continue to do damage to this relationship, including the relationship between Guringai people and their old people who are still here as spirits. I pay my respects to Guringai people, past and present, and pledge to help to create a future that honours and delivers justice to Aboriginal people. And this is a painting of the town where I live by a Guringai artist. So it's very beautiful green country with rolling hills and a big river that runs through it. And she's captured that beautifully here. Simone Turner Ryan is her name. Sorry. So I guess just before I begin to talk about how I started this work, and that, you know, I'm a non-Aboriginal person working in Australia, and so my work with I've been in this country, of course, throughout deep time. My scholarly work is based on my relationships with those people, and those relationships always have to be maintained. That's been difficult during COVID. I live a long way away from the people I work with, but that's just an important thing for me to acknowledge. And, you know, working as a non-Aboriginal person with Aboriginal people, there's power, you know, that I hold that is important to acknowledge as well. My cultural identity as non-Aboriginal, my education, I'm able-bodied, I'm middle class, and also that I bring my own assumptions from my culture, and of course, as everyone working in any field, theories and ideologies that we bring with us as well. So just to kind of gently raise that, I think is important, because, and that the story of languages in Australia. So of course Australia was colonized in 1788, and the place where I work quite a lot later than some of the southern parts of Australia, and it was colonized by pastoralists. So it's a very big beef cattle growing area, and that colonization was quite violent. And a lot of Aboriginal people ended up working as domestic workers and pastoral workers on these large cattle stations, and it was akin to slavery.
Is something the matter?
Yeah, I think
It's from Anna, ya?
yeah, I think it's
Oh,
from
okay.
Anna. Mohon ditunggu sebentar ya. Mungkin ada masalah teknis dengan Anna.
Did I just dropped out? Is that right?
Yes.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. It's clear now.
Yep. Okay, great.
Okay.
Yeah, so, and you know, these kinds of ways that sorry, I was saying that our Prime Minister announced that a whole lot of Aboriginal community were going.
Hello? Anna, I think you're missing again.
Aboriginal people, and they're the reason why our, you know, people's languages are struggling. But along with that, fought really hard for their rights to their country and to their languages. These are pictures of some protests against mining up in the Kimberley, where I have worked in the.
Excuse me, Anna.
And
Sorry,
then more recently, after those, our Prime Minister made those remarks about closing.
I think we lost your PowerPoint.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Do you mind to share your PowerPoint again?
Yeah, sorry about that.
That's okay. Yeah, perfect.
Yep, better. Okay. All right. Sorry, everyone. Yeah, Aboriginal people have always fought very hard for their rights and continue to do so, and that includes their rights to their languages. So here's an image of Australia broken up into our different languages. So as you can see, the black lines delineate very many different languages in the country. And the yellow zone is one language in Australia called the Pamanyungan language family. And then this region here that's zoomed in on, so the very northwestern part of Australia is a lot more diverse in terms of language families. And the language I work with is called Gidja, and it's part of this language family here in dark pink, which is called the Jaragan language family. So it's a family of only 3 languages. So we have an incredibly diverse linguistic landscape in Australia, but of course a lot are under threat because of the kinds of patterns of colonisation that I've just referred to. So there are a few different ways that people in Australia and overseas as well talk about efforts to stem the loss of languages. So is often used for languages in places like Sydney in Australia that were colonised very, very early, and there aren't living mother tongue speakers of so, for example,
Hi, Anna.
hi. Sorry, everybody.
Yeah, I think it will help a little bit if you turn off your video.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I'll do that. Yeah, I hope that helps.
Yes.
Yeah, my apologies. It's very wet here, so I think the internet's not coping. So then we have what people say is revitalization of languages. So these languages, like Gidja, have older speakers who are first language speakers of the language, but children and younger people generally are not learning as a matter of course at home as they grow up. So Gidja is one of these languages, and Mirawong, which is in the same language family. And then we have a very small number of languages in Australia that are considered vital. So they have young children are growing up as mother tongue speakers. So languages like Pitjantjatjara and Yolngu Matha in the Central Desert and right up in the north of Australia. So linguistics in Australia, as you know, as around the world, you know, has played out some of the concerns of colonizers, or you know, and a lot of the sort of early language work was being done by you know, people who were part of the sort of colonizing process. For on the left there is William Dawes, who was the official astronomer on the first fleet, and he did a lot of language recording with this woman below, Pachigarang, who was a Gadigal woman from Sydney. So what we find, I suppose, in Australia is that the concerns of linguists can be said to be about, you know, posterity, or concerns with sort of proving evolutionary theory that Aboriginal people are somehow lower on the evolutionary scale than
Hi, Anna.
Europe.
Sorry to interrupt it.
Yep.
I think you need to share your screen one more time.
Okay, sorry. Every time we
sorry.
drop out, I see.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
It's okay. Take your time.
Yep.
Mm.
Is that better?
Yes, it's perfect.
Okay, I'll just go back. So this is William Dawes, this sort of example of the kind of colonial linguists, I suppose, or people who have been involved in recording languages. But of course, in Australia, we've had a lot of missionary linguists, so linguists who are concerned with Bible translations and the process of evangelism. But then, of course, later, more modern has been concerned with linguistic typology and looking at languages across the globe and what they have in common and how they're related. And then, of course, solidarity with different cultures and interest in supporting their concerns and rights as well. And there's some quotes here just about some of those sort of concerns. Nakata is a Indigenous scholar from Australia, and he says the linguistic nuts and bolts, this is, his view about sort of colonial nature of linguistics, could position people in a universal sequence which would define them in evolutionary history. I'll keep moving because I've lost a little bit of time to problems. And another quote from some people working with language revitalisation in Australia. So the idea that missionaries and subsequently anthropologists documented language and culture in the spirit, not in the belief that they would be assisting future generations to continue languages, but because they believed in making a record for posterity. And I won't read the next quote, but we get a sort of sense of some of the concerns behind linguistics historically in colonised cultures. But then we get the concerns of Aboriginal people. So that is that, for example, whether one language is related in academic terms to another is, according to Patsy Bedford from up where I work, is not particularly relevant to those communities. They're much more concerned with revitalising their languages and having them spoken by children. And here again, we get Aboriginal people talking about the cost of losing languages. If they lose language and connection to culture, they become a nobody inside, and that's enough to put them over the edge. So, for Aboriginal people, it's a matter of cultural continuance and even individual mental health. So these are the kinds of concerns. So, and you're probably familiar, or perhaps some of you are familiar with the products that have come out of linguistic study. The Boasian trilogy, where we get recordings of texts that are transcribed and translated, and then grammars that tell us about the phonology, morphology, and syntax of a language, and often dictionaries and word lists. So these are the sort of the canonical products that linguists of many types have sort of created over the years. And then these become the basis of communities and linguists collaborating to produce all sorts of teaching resources. So that's generally how linguists have been involved in language reclamation. In Australia, they've come into communities, done recordings, analysed them, and then produced these grammars and dictionaries that then can be made into learners' grammars or phrase books, story books, and all sorts of, resources for use in classrooms like posters and flashcards and these kinds of things. And of course, linguistics has changed over the years and gone beyond. There's definitely an acknowledgement in my field that documentation of languages should include a range of contexts, a range of genres and different kinds of speakers. And also that descriptions, so the kind of descriptions and grammars that linguists produce really should consider language change, that languages aren't sort of static and frozen in time, and they influence each other. in processes of contact. They're much more than a set of grammatical rules, and that linguists should consider the priorities of communities and think about the speakers of the languages when they're producing their materials, you know, that the end users are not just other linguists, but are the peoples in those communities who are trying to revitalize their languages. So because today I'm talking about genre theory, I thought I'd just quickly talk about the term genre does pop up in documentation linguistics a little bit, particularly more recently. But the way I've found it gets used is quite variable. So Himmelman talks about examples being monologue, dialogue, historical, chatting. Amory uses ceremonies, chants, and narratives. So basically, if we kind of look through the examples that linguists talk about in terms of the concept of genre, it's quite variable. And for example, Burge just talks about narrative. There aren't other sort of narratives that genres that Burge talks about. So I guess this is where systemic functional linguistics, the way that I've learned about it and practice it, kind of comes in terms of looking at a genre a little bit more systematically. So when I say systematically, I guess this idea that linguists, you know, what is our main job as linguists? You know, we record these texts, these examples of language, but we know that one language, of course, does not contain, you know, the entire system, but it instantiates a much larger system. So the linguistic system potentializes innumerable texts. So if we can understand the system, then we can start to generalize outwards from that one text to talk about the overall system. And the relevance of that to education, I think, is that, and probably most linguists would agree, that once we generalize about language as a system, then we can talk about it, you know, we can be explicit about how it works, and we can develop meta language for those patterns that we've been able to analyze. So my question, sort of as I came into using linguistics in this context, was, well, what do we know about systems for units larger than a clause? So there's a lot of work done in the area of grammar for endangered languages and for Gidja, as I'll show. But what do we know about units like stretches of discourse and genres, as I've flagged? And how do we find out about them? And what I'm going to talk about is how I've tried to collaboratively find out about those systems and about genres in Gidja. So as to sort of round up what I've said, you know, in endangered language linguistics, we have documentation, which is a really important part of the process, recording a language that's under threat. And so from that, we have a corpus of available texts and instances. And Gidja has quite a few. There's a few linguists that have worked on documenting Gidja over the years, including Francis Coford, who's done a lot of description work. So the next step, of course, is analysing those texts and producing some kind of account of that language. So Francis Coford's done a whole lot of work on that in Gidja, and that's extremely helpful. And then the process of, I'm sorry about my misspelling of pedagogy there, but then from those descriptions that linguists produce, we're concerned with how we can use them in teaching and how they can help communities pass the language on to future generations, which in the quotes that I showed before, of course, is of central importance to Aboriginal people. And that's their kind of priority. So getting a bit specific now about the language that I work with. So as I said, older people speak Gidja. There are probably about 20 older people in the community where I work that are mother tongue speakers of Gidja. And they're very clear that they want younger people to be using Gidja in more parts of their life. So because it's only spoken by older people, it tends to be used just when old people, of course, are together. Once younger people are around, Gidja is stopped, the Creoles and the Aboriginal Englishes are used in those kind of contexts. So when people talk about revitalisation, what they mean is they want young people to use the language every day in all sorts of different ways. So I've just got some pictures there that represent that. So in ceremony, song and dance, in teaching, so both out on country, so the middle picture at the top is an old person taking the kids out on a trip to her traditional country and showing them places. And this is the kind of context where people would like to be doing that kind of work in Gidja. But also more everyday uses. So in the home, casual conversation, doing all sorts of kind of domestic processes. People would like to be using Gidja more than they are. So we see a whole kind of range of uses for Gidja that people really, really want to bring the language back into everyday use. So to step from that desire, for people to bring Gidja back into their everyday lives, we can sort of start to build a bridge between that and a model of language in context, and how us as linguists can kind of help that process. So this is the model of culture and the relationship between culture and context and language that I work with as a systemic functional scholar. So this idea that patterns of social organisation in a culture are realised, so manifested, symbolised, encoded or expressed as patterns of social interaction in each context of situation, which in turn are realised as patterns of discourse in each text. So here we can really see the connection between people wanting to continue culture and continue cultures that have been colonised, and they want to do so in their own languages. And so those texts that linguists record, of course, play such a key role in that process of shoring up and transmitting culture. So, as I said, the idea of genre, so the idea that there's a system that goes beyond grammar. There are systems that organise language that are larger than the clause. I'll just unpack the concept of genre that I've used in my work. So this definition is of genre as a goal-oriented social process. So I don't know how familiar any of you are with this idea, but so the idea that a genre is a staged refers to the idea that a text, so any kind of text that perhaps a linguist has recorded, it might be a story or some other kind of text, moves through certain steps. So, and there's been a lot of work describing different genres over the years, and things like, going to a shop and, having a transaction and interaction with someone, buying something in a shop, that there are these predictable kind of steps that we must move through for something for the language that we're using to fulfill its role. So that's what the idea of goal-oriented refers to, so that when we use language, we do so for a specific purpose. And in order to fulfill that purpose, there are certain steps that need to happen. And another definition that I like from Martin and Rose is that genres are recurrent configurations of meaning in a culture. So this idea that there are patterns at the level of text, so between the clause and the context of situation, we have these configurations that repeat. And therefore, as linguists, there's something that we can describe, and we can generalize about them, and therefore talk about them in education. And, you know, I'm not going to go through this complex picture in detail, but just to make the point that these recurrent configurations, these patterns of meaning, can be systematized, so we can have a look at how they relate to each other. And this is the work that my supervisors and Heine's supervisors too actually did in the context of genres for education in Australia specifically. So this idea that there are genres of power in my culture in Australia that students need to master in order to be successful in their culture, in order to function out in their society, and also be critical and kind of contribute to changing that society as well. So I guess the point I'm trying to make here is that the linguists that I have been taught by are doing this kind of work that goes beyond grammars and the clause to look at larger units of meaning. So I guess, the previous slide were those knowledge genres that students, you know, need to master, and that literacy programs, for example, in Australia, teach these knowledge genres. So we have persuasive texts, we have story genres. So we have these sort of families of genres that are considered powerful in a culture. And then we have the classroom genres that these knowledge genres are taught through. So I'll have to move quickly because I lost a little time before there, but let's zoom in and have a look about what I'm talking about in terms of Gidja culture. So I'm called Mantha. And this is a quote from a Gidja person. Old people used to tell us, you can't go to that person's country and get anything. That's another person's land. You can't go and pick up this stuff. No, not even for bush tucker. Right, they've got a month to you first. Then you can take them. So that's a Gidja person talking about this genre. So Mantha is a kind of a rite of passage in Gidja culture. So, and it's part of a ceremony. So water is collected from a creek or spring. And this is something that happens when you have a guest. So green leaves are used to shape the water onto your guest as they walk past their host, and often is rubbed onto their head and shoulders as well. And green leaves are used to make a fire. Alternatively, if there's no water course around, and guests walk through that smoke. And then again, the gum leaves are often pressed on the head and shoulders and legs as well. So the smoke and the leaves and the water are powerful kind of symbols. And I won't read that long quote, but those material things enhance the mediation and efficacy of mantha by enabling greater access to the non-material realm, and hence for achieving particular outcomes normally outside the reach of human agents. So the purpose of mantha is to symbolize a state. So it's, the linguist who works with Gidja says, it's used in any context where the ceremony makes future actions allowable. So it can be going to country where you're a stranger, or it can be for other kind of contexts as well. But the main purpose is to make that guest known to the spirits. So Aboriginal people believe that their ancestors, after they die, reside in the country, and they are powerful forces. So you have to maintain a relationship with the spirits. And this is a ceremony that does that, and is a process whereby new people are introduced to those spirits. So they go from being unknown to the spirits to known. And so their presence on the country from prohibited to permitted. And, you know, the spirits have potential to do harm to us, according to Gidja people. So this is a way of protecting your guests from harm, and also reassuring those spirits that you don't mean any harm. So again, the water and smoke that are important. So if we talk about text with a purpose, well, the purpose of this particular use of language is that when strangers enter country uninvited, this is an inherently dangerous situation that needs to be managed. So spirits are kind of there to protect the country, so they're there to be kind of respected. So what's the role of language in all of this? Well, as these physical acts are taking place, people speak to the spirits. So if they don't know how to talk to the ancestors, they'll get hurt, they'll get sick. So the language is a really important part of that process. So in 2016, I was working in the community, doing language facilitation in different kind of educational contexts. And a group of younger Gidja people approached us because they were working as rangers. So they were paid to go out onto their country and undertake land management activities like weed control and cultural burning and wildlife surveys and all of these kinds of activities. But they often had to go to these remote places without any old people. And they were really worried because they didn't have the linguistic skills to speak to the spirits. And often they may not have been to that place themselves, or they were taking other Aboriginal people from other places, or white people, for example, ecologists or different professionals in that field. So I worked with the elders to come up with a sort of a process of apprenticing these young people into this genre that was so important for them to know how to do. So we came up with these steps that we identified the need, which was the rangers' need to learn the genre. And the next place to look was, how do we teach the genre? What does it look like? We need to look at instances in the corpus. So here comes our documentation and the incredibly important role of linguists and the work they've done over the years. So we have these wonderful recordings of mantha, and we're so lucky to have them. But the next step, what do we do with them? We can listen to them, and they're wonderful things to listen to, and we get so much from listening. But there was also a sense, well, if we're going to help teach these young people how to do it, we need to analyze those examples So how do we analyze them? And how do we bring our knowledge about language to consciousness? So I'll go into that in a little bit more detail. But what we needed to do really was create a new text. So a short version that these young people could learn quickly, so they could go out in the field and they could speak to these spirits and fulfill this social purpose. So they could keep themselves safe and they could keep their guests safe as well. So we've identified the need. And I'll quickly play one of our recordings, because it's nice to hear a bit of Gija, I think, but I'll have to gallop along after that.
Kamalanyal ngaojin. Kale boron ba. Kanang kaya rin nare ko kandak pagiram no nanganare. An winjaram berangan ka gemberam na yara. Yara no ko kalangamwana. Lenga yarangon jenong ko dakkeram. No nanga boram jarakkeram. Wai palom. Tam boror tade dak pombaraman benare. Mananga naro nangare. Toron banyare naro na beredam. Wan diel goro gemberam na yara. Kok anira nare dakkeram. Dalam dam. Don't make a shake with when they come visiting because you are like when you are not even come and bother your mom, you know, like them. That we let them know now we will come visit them. So they can try make me shake for anything.
So that's a lovely example of that genre. And you can hear the speaker talking her second language, which is Kimberley Creole, at the end and explaining what she's just said. So we have adults. If we look at who's involved, we have adults that need to learn this genre, but they're not Gija speakers. We have elders who know this mantra, but aren't necessarily conscious of the patterns that they might need to pass on. You know, they know how to perform this, but they don't necessarily know how to teach it. So then we have linguists, such as myself, and I know something about the language as a system, but I'm an outsider, you know, and I'm from the colonizing culture. So it's a complex educational process we have with all of us. Oh, sorry. What have I done? So just to quickly say, as I said, the elders are Gija speakers. They're mother tongue speakers of Gija, which is endangered. And then they also speak Creole, but that's their second language. But our young rangers, Kimberley Creole is their first language. And then the third language for Gija people is English, but of course that's my first language. So then I said, well, you know, what do I bring to this? How can I help kind of facilitate this process, which is sort of new to all of us. So I turned to the teaching and learning cycle, which has come out of genre pedagogy. And I won't be able to go into detail about that model, but I'll just focus on two phases of this cycle, which are deconstruction. So a very important concept is that you take text, you identify its organization, so, and the key language features. So what are the language patterns that we can talk about in a mantra text? And then the next stage, once we've identified those, is to construct a new text of the genre following those general patterns. So this is where we could construct a text for those rangers to learn and then perform when they went out onto their country. So we've had a bit of a look at who the learners are and how complex it is. So this is just a little way of representing, you know, we have our elders who are the expert speakers of Gija. We have the adults who speak, you know, more Gija than me, but less than their elders. But And as a linguist, I have some knowledge of Gija and also of more of the writing system, whereas the elders, for example, they're not literate in any language. So that's a bit of a sort of a sense of the pedagogic teachers and learners, I guess, in this. So we have this process of different people at different points being teachers and different and learners. So we all sort of play different roles. And I think I'm going to run out of time for a lot of detail here. But first of all, the speaker of that original text that you listened to told us a little bit about the situation. So that's what I say when I go to my country. That video is at Maple Downs. I was talking to my ancestors who have passed away. So she kind of sets up for us some of the sort of the elements of the situation. But then we took our text and we analysed it clause by clause. So what we had from our linguist, from myself and another linguist, was a transcription of the Gija recording. And then what we added was, and you can see on the right here, this is our whiteboard. We added our word level gloss. So underneath each word, we added the English gloss for each word. And then we came up with a free translation in green there. So we kind of, that's the process whereby we broke down that text and started to analyze it together and look at some of the patterns. And of course, we used Creole for the free translation because that was the first language of our students. But of course, you know, that this is just to say it wasn't very easy. Gija has some very complicated morphology. So sometimes one word took, you know, a whole sentence to gloss. So it was a complex process. So the elders in the process acted as teachers. So they translating words, unpacking meanings. For example, here, what's gangin mean? Gangin means they treat you like a stranger, you know. So they would translate these different items. But at different points, I, as a linguist, would elicit the elders' knowledge. So I might have known something. I knew the meaning of this word already, but I asked them to explain it to the students so that they would be sharing their knowledge about the language with the students. So I said, what does warin mean on its own? Sick. So the g is the make part. So I'll put a little dash there. So here we have on the left an example of a word with a suffix. So that was me kind of eliciting some more knowledge about the different parts of the morphology of that word. So I guess in that sense, the linguists and as me and the elders were both acting as teachers in that process. And then we got the students to speak, so to repeat the text so that they were practicing to speak orally, which was very challenging for them. And but important part, you know, we were teaching an oral language. We weren't teaching a literacy class. They needed to be able to speak this. So the elders would model the clause, the students, the adults would repeat it, and the elders would then affirm or challenge. So here, muwan warin jambaringa, jambarinna. So they're emphasizing the last syllable and correcting pronunciation there. So again, the elders are acting as teachers. So we went through that process with the whole text, clause by clause, and with the model text as the source. And the speaker of the original text built the field for us. The elders would unpack the meanings and then model the speaking, and the adults would respond to prompts and ask questions. And then my role would be to kind of prompt the elders to bring out their knowledge about the language. So then we kind of identified some of the obligatory meanings. So this is where we go back up to the concept of genre. You know, how's this model text structured? And we had a big discussion about that and what could we understand from our model text. So the 4 kind of obligatory meanings that needed to be in our new text: call out to old people, say who you brought, ask them to look after you, and say why you came. So everyone agreed pretty easily that these were these were the meanings that needed to be included, but a little bit more complex to then unpack how they should be organised and realised. But we went through a process similar to the deconstruction in a way. I would sort of often prompt. So here I say, that's the first part, when you've got to sing out to all the old people. So that's first. What would you have to say next? So some sort of common sense meta language, but beginning to kind of see how we could, what the elders would say about how we needed to organise these meanings. And then the elders would offer a new realisation, like Luan Gangin Jambarich, don't strangers. And again, we do the oral practice at the end. So I'm going to run out of time. Nazar, do you think I could just go 5 minutes over before we start questions? Is that okay?
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah, thank you. So that's the kind of the process that we went through in order to come up with our new text. And I'll just fast forward, I think, to so this is our two example texts. One of them is the original text that we were working with, and on the right there is our jointly constructed text. So as you can see, it's a little bit shorter, and therefore kind of easier for the students to learn and to master. But you can see that on the left here, we've got some new labels. So through that process of deconstructing the text, we kind of analysed that organisation and decided that there were 2 stages. There were 2 of those stages that the text had to go through in order to fulfil its purpose. So they are the approach, so calling out to the spirits in the country, and then the address. So, and then there were our other sort of obligatory meanings were a little bit more variable. They didn't seem to have to come in a certain order, and actually they were repeated, returned to, so they didn't sort of unfold in predictable stages, as we could see, but there were certainly some patterns there. So we decided the phases were something like request. So we had to ask for protection. So may you not make us sick. Don't make us sick with magic. Don't make us unwell. So it's sort of acknowledging the power of the spirits to cause harm and asking them not to. And the second sort of meaning was a reassurance. So telling the spirits that we as guests meant no harm, you know. So I just came to have a look at these houses. We all left a long time ago. We've come to see you just to see you. We're looking around at your country. I just brought them to show you country. So this kind of sense of telling them what you're doing there and reassuring them. And then, of course, introducing people to the spirit. So I brought these children and these white people for talking, or I brought them to talk, these white people. I brought them to you. So we can see the kind of step from looking at our text looking at the instance, the specific instance, to what sort of meanings made up that text, and then having to create our new one. I'll just so, you know, there are things we had to consider when we created our new text, because this would have to sort of be transferable for lots of different contexts. So these young people were taking out, as I said, perhaps ecologists, maybe experts about, you know, botany and weed control. So every time they performed this, their relationship to the people they took would be different. Their relationships to the spirit and to the place, and of course the specific activities they would engage in would be different. One thing that stayed the same was it was always an oral genre, and it would always has to happen face to face. So you're there in the country talking to the spirits with your guests there. So that was a kind of something that stayed constant. Oh. So I guess in SFL terms, these variables are what dimensions of what we will call register. So the genre is the same. You know, in each situation, it's still a recognisable mantha genre. It's got the same social purpose, and therefore has to move through the same stages, as we've called them. But we have these other aspects of the situation that vary. So when in SFL, when we talk about field, we mean, you know, the participants, the circumstances, and the activities that they're engaged in. So what, where, when, how, and with what, all of those kind of experiential aspects. And then tenor is what we call, you know, the interpersonal element of all of this. So who's involved, who's interacting in this text, and importantly, what are their relationships to one another? So, and their status, you know, their relative status, how close or distant are they in terms of those relationships? And then the mode. So what kind of channel is this all happening through? Are we on the phone? Are we watching a video on TV? Are we face-to-face? And those kinds of considerations, or the channel through which we communicate, all affects how the meanings are kind of organised. So that was sort of a way of me thinking through how to facilitate writing this new text with people, coming up with this new text. How do we make these meanings general enough while still conforming to the genre, and making sure our new text fulfilled its purpose of keeping people safe and building that relationship with the spirits. Yeah. So a few more minutes. As I said, this was our new text, which was much shorter, but I've organised it here in terms of the obligatory meanings that we identified together. And as I mentioned, those at the level of the discourse, they were arranged differently in different examples of the text. So David Rose says that texts or genres oriented towards interpersonal goals, such as solidarity or persuasion, accumulate prosodically as the dialogue unfolds and may not necessarily be achieved through a series of discrete stages. So that sort of helps us think about the variability of the way those meanings are organised. So I'll just wrap up very quickly. The new text was a successful process in that we had a new text that was relatively easy for our students to learn. Therefore, they were empowered to quickly take up their responsibility towards their guests and towards their country. The process was collaborative, so it wasn't just me sort of coming in and saying, this is how a Mantha genre works and this is how it should be done. But we, the elders were treated as experts and teachers in that process. And while drawing upon some of the sort of understandings we could glean from the linguistic description. But of course, there were challenges. Our adult learners were never really in the position of being teachers, which was uncomfortable for me, given that I'm not from that culture, and not very empowering for them. And so that's something I've, needs to be kind of considered, and figuring out how to put them in the position of being knowers and being teachers in that context. And of course, our text was shorter. It was much simpler than the original. So some of the sort of the intricacy of the longer texts were lost. And that, as I said, that's because we had to consider how the text would be used in different contexts, but also, and where they would be traveling to and those sorts of things. And of course, there's a lot more to sort of work out in terms of how to sort of scaffold this genre and this process for hopefully those rangers, those adults we were teaching, then becoming teachers of younger people as well, and handing over that power to them. So lots to think about. But thank you so much for listening.
Hey, thank you very much, Anna.